I can still feel those eyes on my back, the way people used to stare when I walked down Main Street. Even after all these years, the memory burns hotter than the Tennessee sun. Folks called me the Horsewoman of Willow Hollow. I used to think time would wash away the whispers, but 60 years later, they still echo in my head. They said I did something unspeakable, something not even a sinner could dream up. But they never knew the truth. Nobody did. The truth was darker, crueler, and I've carried it like a stone in my chest my whole life. Now I'm 70 years old, sitting in my creaky old rocking chair, the paint peeling like old skin. My hands tremble when I hold my teacup, and sometimes I can barely look at my own reflection. But I can't leave this world with the truth buried any longer. My boy, my Johnny, deserves to know. He turned 55 last week, brought me a cake from the Piggly Wiggly, and a card that made me cry right into my coffee. I smiled and lied like I always have. You see, I told him a story about his father, one I invented long ago to protect him. Everyone believed it because the truth was too horrifying to face. But lies have a way of turning into cages, and I've been locked inside mine for too long. I grew up on a small farm just outside Willow Hollow, a dot of a town tucked between green hills and red clay roads. Our farmhouse was old, with faded yellow curtains my mama had sewn before her lungs gave out. The smell of bacon grease and coffee was as constant as the creak of those warped wooden floors. Daddy ran the place, or maybe it ran him. He was a hard man, his hands like cracked leather, his temper meaner than a cornered snake. When Mama got too sick to get out of bed, it was just him and me. I was 14 when the worst years of my life began. We had a horse named Midnight, a black quarter horse with kind eyes and a soft snort that sounded almost human. He was my only friend. Sometimes, when Daddy stumbled home drunk, yelling at the walls, I'd slip out to the barn and sit with Midnight till dawn. His steady breathing was the only sound that could calm my heart. I can still see the farmhouse the way it looked back then. The screen door hanging crooked, the roof patched with rusted tin, the smell of rain mixing with the dirt road after a storm. It was home, but it never felt safe. The neighbors were miles away, and folks in town kept their noses out of other people's business, at least until the rumors started. They thought they knew what kind of girl I was. They thought they knew everything that went on out at the Miller farm. But they were wrong. If you've ever lived in a small town, you know how stories grow. Whispers turn into sermons, lies become legends. And before long, I wasn't just Aliza Miller. I was a warning. A name mothers hissed to their children when they misbehaved. They said I'd done something unholy with that horse, and I let them believe it. Because the truth, what really happened in that house, was worse than any rumor they could have invented. And tonight, for the first time in my life, I'm ready to tell it. The lie they believed about me was monstrous. But the truth? The truth was born on a stormy April night that still haunts my every dream. The year I turned 14, everything changed. Mama had been coughing for months, her lungs rattling like dry leaves in the wind. The doctor from town said it was consumption, but we didn't have the money for proper medicine. I remember the night she looked at me with tired eyes and said, "You be careful with your heart, Aliza. Men can be wolves wearing shepherd's clothes." I didn't understand her then. I wish to heaven I had. After Mama passed that spring, it was just me and Daddy in that house with the sagging porch and the broken shutters that whined every time the wind blew. Folks brought casseroles for a week, said things like, "Poor child, and Ray's girl will grow up fast now." Then they went back to their lives and left me with the man I'd soon learn to fear. Daddy had always been rough around the edges, but grief turned him into something darker. The bottle became his Bible. Every night, he came home reeking of whiskey, mumbling to himself, slamming doors, throwing dishes. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel drive after sundown became my warning bell. Time to disappear. That's when I started spending more and more nights in the barn. Midnight would nicker softly when I came in, shifting his weight like he knew I needed him close. I'd sit beside him in the straw, reading by the light of a kerosene lantern, pretending I was somewhere else. Anywhere else but that farm. His big brown eyes seemed to understand everything I never dared to say. School was my only escape. Mrs. Collins, my teacher, was kind. The kind that makes your heart ache because you know you don't deserve it. She said I was bright, told me I could go to college if I wanted. I didn't have the courage to tell her that Daddy laughed whenever I mentioned dreams. "Books won't feed you," he'd say, shoveling food into his mouth, "and you ain't going nowhere." By late October, the whole town was preparing for the Harvest Festival, the one night a year when even the poorest families came together to eat, dance, and forget their troubles. I had washed my one good dress and borrowed a ribbon from Mrs. Peterson at the general store. I was ready to feel normal, even for a few hours. But Daddy had other ideas. When I came out of my room that evening, dressed and smiling for the first time in months, he looked up from his bottle and sneered, "You ain't going nowhere." I started to protest, and that's when his hand cracked across my cheek. The world tilted. The bottle rolled across the floor, spilling whiskey that stung my nose. "I said you ain't going," he shouted, his voice rough and full of hate. I ran to the barn, barefoot and crying, the cold October air biting at my skin. I curled up beside Midnight, clutching his mane like it could keep me from falling apart. He stood still and quiet while I sobbed into the straw, his warm breath misting the cold air around me. I must have fallen asleep there because I woke up to rough hands yanking me from the ground. Daddy's grip was iron around my wrist, his face twisted with rage and drink. "This where you been hidin'?" he slurred. "Out here like some stray cat?" Before I could answer, he dragged me back toward the house, my feet scraping against the frozen dirt. Midnight neighed behind us, pawing at the stall door like he wanted to stop him. That was the night he hit me with his belt for the first time. Real hits, the kind that left purple marks across my back and legs. I didn't scream, wouldn't give him the satisfaction. After that, something in me broke, but something else woke up too. A quiet, stubborn flame. I started saving pennies from odd jobs, hiding them in a jar under the floorboard. I didn't know where I'd go yet, but I promised myself I'd get out of that house if it was the last thing I did. Days turned into weeks. Winter came early that year. I kept my head down, my mouth shut, and my hope small enough to fit in my pocket. But one thing I didn't know was that the worst night of my life hadn't happened yet. Because when the thunder rolled through Willow Hollow one April night, it didn't just bring a storm. It brought the end of the girl I used to be. I remember that night like it's carved into my bones. April in Tennessee can be wild. One minute the air feels soft as honey. The next it's shaking the windows loose. That evening the clouds rolled in low and angry, thunder grumbling across the hills like a warning from heaven itself. Daddy had gone into town early that morning, saying something about needing feed. I knew better. Feed was just another word for whiskey. By the time the sun slipped behind the hills, the rain came down in thick silver sheets. The roof leaked in 3 places, and I'd set out pots to catch the drips, their steady plink, 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 keeping time with my heart. I was reading by lamplight, Mama's old quilt around my shoulders, when I heard the truck. Tires sliding in the mud, engine growling like a beast. My stomach knotted. Nothing good ever came home in a storm. The door banged open, slamming against the wall. There he was, soaked, swaying, eyes red and mean. "Where's my supper?" he barked, water dripping from his hair onto the floor. "I'll fix you a plate," I said quickly, setting my book aside. My voice shook, and I hated that he could hear it. "Don't want no leftovers," he snapped, stepping closer. The smell of whiskey hit before his breath did. "You think you're too good to cook for your own daddy now? Too busy with your fancy books?" "No, sir," I whispered. "I'll make coffee, get you warm." He moved fast for a drunk man, his hand gripping my chin, forcing me to look at him. "You look just like her," he muttered. "Just like your mama when she was young." There was something wrong in his eyes, a kind of hunger that made my skin crawl. I tried to pull away, but his fingers dug deeper. "Please, Daddy, you're hurting me." For a heartbeat, I thought he'd stop. He stepped back, breathing heavy, running a hand through his wet hair. But then lightning flashed, white and blinding, and in that split second of brightness, something shifted in him. The last bit of decency burned away. He grabbed me again, rougher this time, always prancing around, acting high and mighty. "You think I don't see you?" His voice was slurred, but his grip was steady. "You ain't better than me, Aliza." I froze, the world shrinking down to his hands, his voice, the smell of rain and sweat and fear. I tried to push him away, but he was stronger. The thunder drowned out my sobs as he dragged me down to the floor. The rest of it comes in flashes, the lamp tipping, glass shattering, the sound of rain pounding the roof like 1,000 fists. My pleas, his anger, the cold linoleum biting into my skin. When it was over, he stood, fixing his belt like nothing had happened. "Clean yourself up," he said flatly, not meeting my eyes. "And don't you breathe a word to anyone. Nobody'd believe you anyway." Then he stumbled down the hall, door slamming behind him. I stayed there for a long time. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. When I finally stood, I washed my hands till the skin turned raw, but no amount of scrubbing could make me clean again. When the first light of dawn slipped through the curtains, I went to the barn. Midnight was waiting, ears twitching, eyes full of quiet worry. He pressed his nose against my shoulder, and I fell apart. I cried into his mane until there were no tears left, just empty air and a silence too heavy to carry. In that barn, I made myself a promise. No one will ever touch me again. No one will ever break me again. But promises are fragile things, and mine shattered a few weeks later, the morning I realized my monthly bleeding hadn't come. At first, I told myself it was the stress, the nightmares, the sleepless nights, but deep down, I knew. My body knew. Something was growing inside me. I thought the storm had ended that night, but the truth was, it had only just begun, and this time, it was inside me. The days after that storm blurred together. I moved through the house like a ghost, careful not to breathe too loud or make eye contact. Daddy acted as if nothing had happened. He'd eat the meals I set out, grumble about the weather, and fall asleep in his chair with the radio humming low. I started sleeping with the dresser pushed up against my bedroom door and Mama's old paring knife under my pillow. A month passed. Then 2. When the bleeding never came, my stomach turned cold with knowing. The truth grew heavier with every sunrise. Something was growing inside me, something I hadn't asked for and didn't understand how to face. Mrs. Peterson at the general store noticed before anyone else. "You look pale, child," she said softly, slipping a jar of jam into my bag. "You been eating enough?" "Just tired," I lied, forcing a smile. "Lots of chores lately." Her eyes lingered on me longer than usual. Maybe she knew. Maybe she just saw a scared girl and didn't know what to do about it. Back then, people didn't talk about those things. They whispered about them. I wore Mama's old dresses, the loose ones that hung off me like curtains. But by summer, there was no hiding it. My belly had begun to swell, and Daddy had started watching me the way a snake watches a mouse. One morning, while I was feeding the chickens, I heard his voice behind me, quiet but sharp as glass. "You got something to tell me, girl?" My hand froze over the feed bucket. "No, sir." He came closer, the smell of whiskey already thick in the air. "Don't lie to me. You're in the family way, ain't you? Who's the boy?" My throat went dry. If I told the truth, I didn't know what he'd do, to me, to the baby, to himself. My heart pounded, and before I could think, the lie spilled out of my mouth like poison. It was midnight. The words hung between us like thunder. He stared at me, unblinking, then burst out laughing. Not a real laugh, a broken, cruel one that chilled my blood. "The horse?" he wheezed, wiping tears from his eyes. "You expect me to believe that?" I didn't answer. I just stood there, my face burning, my heart hammering. "Well, ain't that something?" he said finally, that awful grin spreading across his face. "Guess I ought to let folks know what kind of daughter I raised." And he did. By the end of the week, the whole town was talking. I saw it in their eyes when I went to the store, pity mixed with disgust. Some wouldn't even look at me. Others made the sign of the cross when I passed. The Horsewoman. That's what they called me. The truth would have destroyed me, but the lie turned me into a legend, a monster. I let them believe it, because what else could I do? She looked at me for a long time, tears in her eyes. "That's not possible, child. That's not how nature works." "I know what I know," I said, and walked away before she could see the truth in my face. By the time winter came, my secret was too big to hide, and the whispers too loud to bear. But God sent me one last kindness, Mrs. Peterson again. She came by with a box full of baby things and a number scribbled on paper. "Her name's Mabel Johnson," she said. "She's a midwife from over in Jackson. She don't care what the town says. Call her when it's time." 2 weeks later, under a cold January moon, the pains started. Alone in my bed, I thought I might die. But Mabel came like an angel, strong and steady. After hours of agony, the cries that filled that little room weren't monstrous. They were human. A baby boy. My Johnny. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes. A piece of light in all that darkness. But when Daddy came home and saw that child in my arms, I learned that some monsters don't die. They just change faces. Daddy came home 3 days after Johnny was born. I'll never forget the sound of that door slamming open, like thunder rolling through the house. He reeked of whiskey and gunpowder, the smell of a man who'd been running from himself for too long. He found me in Mama's old room, the baby cradled in my arms. For a long, terrible moment, he just stared. His face didn't twist with anger like I expected. It went blank, hollow, as if some part of him had died on the way home. "So it's done then," he muttered finally. "Let me see him." "He's sleeping," I said softly, clutching Johnny closer. He stepped forward anyway, his shadow falling across us both. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. When he pulled back the blanket and looked at that tiny face, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or shame. But it vanished as quickly as it came. "Don't expect me to help with it," he said, straightening up. "Your mess, your problem." I swallowed hard. "We'll manage." He grunted and walked away, but I saw the way his hands trembled as he poured another drink. He was scared. Maybe of me. Maybe of what that baby represented. Either way, I knew we couldn't stay. 2 days later, I heard midnight's panicked neigh echo through the cold morning air. I ran to the barn, Johnny wrapped in a blanket against my chest. Midnight was on the ground, sides heaving, foam at his mouth. I saw the old feed bucket nearby, dusted with white powder, rat poison. I dropped to my knees beside him. "No, no, boy, please," I begged, stroking his trembling neck. His big eyes rolled toward me one last time, full of confusion and trust. He died before I could even say goodbye. That broke something in me that had already been cracked too long. The man who'd destroyed. My life had now killed the only creature that had ever loved me without judgment. That was the day I decided. We were leaving. By dawn the next morning, I'd packed a small carpet bag with clothes, baby things, and Mama's old Bible. I wrapped Johnny tight against my chest and walked down that long dirt drive without looking back. The farmhouse behind me was just a silhouette against the gray sky, a ghost I'd never let follow me again. An old truck stopped on the road when the driver saw me. He was a kind man named Earl, hauling goods toward Nashville. He didn't ask questions, just helped me climb in, handed me a blanket and said, "Ain't safe for a young mama to be walking alone." He dropped us at a small boarding house run by his sister-in-law, Martha. She gave us a room, a meal, and eventually a job cleaning rooms in exchange for rent. For the first time in my life, I felt safe. The city was loud, full of strangers, and that was exactly what I needed, to be invisible. Years passed. I worked, saved, and watched Johnny grow strong and kind. He had his daddy's blue eyes, but not his darkness. Thank the Lord for that. I told him his father was a soldier, a hero who died overseas. It was the only story I could bear to tell. We built a life. A small one, but ours. Johnny went to school, then college. I watched him chase dreams I never had the chance to dream myself. He made me proud every single day. For decades, I never spoke of Willow Hollow. I buried it so deep that even I started to believe the silence could keep it gone. But secrets have a way of breathing through the cracks. Years later, when Johnny was grown and I was gray and slow, a letter came. My father, dying, wanted to see me. I went, not for him, but for the girl I once was, the one who never got to speak. He lay in that hospital bed, small and weak, with eyes that looked almost sorry. He said my name like it hurt to speak it. "You came back," he whispered. "I did," I told him, "but not for you, for me." He tried to apologize, but I stopped him. There are no words that can clean blood from memory. I didn't forgive him, but I did let him die without hate in my heart. Because hate only poisons the one who carries it. When he was gone, I walked out into the parking lot and watched the sunset spill gold over the hills. For the first time, I felt light. I went home to my son, to my peace, to the quiet truth that I'd survived. They once called me the Horsewoman of Willow Hollow, but that was never who I was. I was a girl who lived through the storm and learned how to ride the wind that followed. If you've carried pain so long it feels like a part of you, remember this. The past may shape you, but it doesn't own you. You do.